The ghost lived in the code, and Kalen Vance was its keeper. Or he had been until 6 months ago. Now he was just a man haunted by his own creation. His apartment was a testament to a mind that never switched off. 3 monitors formed a glowing triptych on his desk, their light casting long, dancing shadows across walls covered in whiteboards scrawled with algorithms and character arcs. Empty mugs, stained with the rings of countless cold coffees, stood sentinel beside towers of programming manuals. In the center of it all sat Kai, a lanky figure swallowed by a faded gray hoodie, his face pale and drawn in the artificial twilight of his own making. On the screens, Nexus Zero was screaming its imminent birth to the world. A slick multi-million-dollar marketing campaign was in its final, deafening crescendo. Explosions blossomed in silent, vibrant bursts. A heroine with a jawline carved from granite and eyes that glowed with righteous fury leaped across a chasm of shattered chrome and neon. The orchestral score swelled, a wave of manufactured emotion designed to stir the soul and open the wallet. No, 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 Kai muttered, his fingers steepled before his lips. The on-screen heroine Lyra vaulted over a barricade, her movements fluid but wrong. Her center of gravity is off. She'd over-rotate. It's a rookie mistake. He wasn't watching as a fan, he was dissecting it frame by agonizing frame. He saw the seams where his elegant, physics-based engine had been crudely stitched to a more generic, market-friendly animation set. He saw the dialogue, once nuanced and philosophical, now boiled down to pithy, trailer-ready catchphrases. They had taken his symphony and turned it into a 3-minute pop song. A new graphic flashed across the screen, all polished metal and electric blue. Global launch in 1 week. Kai's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. 1 week until his ghost was exorcised, repackaged, and sold to the highest bidder. 1 week until they took the last piece of his brother and put a price tag on it. His gaze drifted to a small, framed photograph on the corner of his desk, away from the clutter. In it, 2 boys sat on a worn living room carpet, their faces illuminated by the glow of a CRT television. A younger Kai, all skinny arms and untamed hair, held a clunky game controller. Beside him, his little brother David was sketching furiously in a notepad, his tongue stuck out in concentration. David, with his wild imagination and the brittle bone disease that had kept him tethered to their house, had been the architect of worlds. Kai had just been the builder. He remembered the smell of ozone from the old TV and the scratch of David's pencil on paper. What if the final level wasn't a place you beat, Kai? David had asked, his voice thin but thrumming with excitement. What if it was a place you remembered, a place where nothing is ever really lost? That idea had become the heart of Nexus Zero. Not the guns, not the explosions, but the core concept. A digital afterlife, a server where consciousness could be preserved, a haven against the finality of loss. It had been his promise to David in the quiet, sterile months before the end. He would build a world where they could always be together, a place where memory was immortal. He called it David's Archive. The TV spot ended with the Aethelred Studios logo, a stylized silver A that looked like a shark's fin cutting through water. And below it, the name that felt like a physical blow, a Julian Thorne production. Kai's hands curled into fists. Julian Thorne, the silver-tongued CEO who had seen the genius in Kai's work, had called him a visionary. And then, when the vision was complete, had surgically excised him from the equation. The memory was still raw, a wound that refused to scar over. Thorne, in his $1,000 suit, leaning back in his leather chair, explaining that Kai's artistic stubbornness was a liability. The project needed a team player to get it over the finish line. The project needed someone who didn't see a memorial but a product. He pushed back from his desk, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He walked to the window and stared down at the city, a sprawling circuit board of light and life. Down there, millions of people were waiting for Nexus Zero, completely unaware of the ghost that powered it, the quiet promise made between 2 brothers that was about to be turned into a global commodity. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the periphery of a world he had built. And in 1 week, the doors would be sealed forever. The countdown had begun. The next morning, the world outside his window was gray and drizzling, the sky the color of static. Kai was hunched over his keyboard, mainlining caffeine and tracing the data packets that flowed from Aethelred's public servers, a masochistic ritual he couldn't seem to stop. He was looking for any sign, any fragment of his original code that had survived the corporate butchering. It was like trying to find a single familiar grain of sand on a redeveloped beach. The jarring buzz of his apartment's intercom sliced through his concentration. He ignored it. No one came to see him. His world had shrunk to the dimensions of his apartment, his only interactions with the pizza delivery guy who knew not to make eye contact. The buzzing persisted, insistent and sharp. With a groan, Kai pushed himself up and shuffled to the door, peering through the peephole. A courier stood in the hallway, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum, his face impassive under the brim of his cap. Kai cracked the door open. "Yeah, package for Kaylin Vance," the man said, holding out a sleek, corporate-branded waterproof envelope. It bore the Aethelred Studios logo. A chill, colder than the damp air from the hallway, crept down Kai's spine. He took the envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. He closed the door and leaned against it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew with a certainty that settled like lead in his gut that this wasn't fan mail. He tore it open. Inside was a thick sheaf of high-quality paper, held together by a gleaming silver clip. The letterhead was from a law firm whose name was composed of a series of other, older names, a corporate Cerberus guarding the gates of commerce. The words, couched in the sterile, impenetrable language of legal threats, leaped out at him. Cease and desist any and all claims, public or private, to the intellectual property known as Nexus Zero, violation of the non-disclosure and non-compete agreements signed on, allegations of proprietary code theft and attempted sabotage prior to termination. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. They were accusing him of stealing his own soul. It was a preemptive strike, a perfectly crafted instrument of intimidation designed to shatter any thought he might have of speaking out. They weren't just stealing his work, they were salting the earth of his reputation, ensuring nothing could ever grow there again. If he so much as whispered his own name in the same sentence as Nexus Zero, they would bury him under a mountain of litigation so vast it would blot out the sun. This was the inciting incident, the final brutal shove. His passivity, his quiet, simmering resentment was no longer a sustainable defense. It was a cage and the walls were closing in. His mind flashed back to his last day at the Aegis, Aethelred's gleaming steel and glass headquarters. He was standing in Julian Thorne's office, a sterile expanse of white marble and panoramic city views. Thorne hadn't been angry. He had been disappointed, the way a man might be disappointed in a tool that had broken. "Kai, you're a purist," Julian had said, his voice smooth as polished chrome. He circled his desk, a predator in his own habitat. "It's what makes you a brilliant creator. But it's a terrible trait for a product manager. You see this game as a monument. I see it as a flagship. Monuments are static. They belong to the past. Flagships have to move, they have to conquer. It's my work, Julian. My code. My brother's idea, and you were compensated for that work," Julian had countered, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Aethelred took the risk. Aethelred built the infrastructure. You provided the spark, yes. But we built the engine. And now the engine needs a driver who isn't afraid to push it to its limits." He was fired 10 minutes later, escorted out by security like a common criminal, his access cards deactivated before he even reached the lobby. They had packed up his desk for him. They had stolen his ghost. And now they were sending him a bill for the haunting. Kai crumpled the letter in his fist, the thick paper crinkling in protest. A surge of something hot and unfamiliar flooded his veins. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a cold, clarifying rage. They thought a piece of paper could scare him. They thought he was just another cog they could discard, another ghost they could exorcise with legal threats. They had built their flagship on his foundation, and they had forgotten one crucial detail. He had built a lock into the heart of that foundation. A lock that only he could open. Defeat was a physical weight. It pressed down on Kai's chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He'd spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated paralysis, alternating between staring at the threatening letter and the mocking countdown clock for the Nexus Zero launch. They had him. They had all the money, all the lawyers, and all the power. He was just a guy in a hoodie with a half-empty bottle of milk in his fridge. As dusk bled into night, turning the city into a constellation of distant, indifferent lights, his secure messenger pinged. It was an encrypted app he hadn't used in months. The notification was a single stylized letter A against a black background. His breath caught. He clicked on the notification. A call was coming through. Voice only. He hesitated for a second, then answered. "You took your time," a woman's voice said, sharp and clear with no room for pleasantries. It was a voice he knew well, a voice that had cut through his coding fugues with bug reports and wry observations. "Anya," he breathed. "They didn't get in, Kai," Anya Sharma said, her tone a mixture of grim satisfaction and urgency. "The lock is holding." Kai sank into his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all day. "Anya, of course." She had been the lead QA tester on Nexus Zero, a woman with a mind as ruthlessly logical as his own. She saw systems, be it code, corporate hierarchies, or security protocols, not as rules to be followed but as puzzles to be solved. "What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What do you think happened?" she shot back. "They fired me. 2 weeks after you. Insubordination, they called it. I called it refusing to sign off on a build that was riddled with Marcus's sloppy patches. He was trying to brute force a workaround for your systems instead of actually understanding them. It was like watching a chimp try to perform surgery with a hammer. The mention of Marcus Cole, his former friend and lead programmer, sent a fresh pang of betrayal through him. But the archive, Kai pressed. The final level sealed up tighter than Thorne's wallet, Anya confirmed. They've thrown everything at it. Brute force hacks outside crypto analysts, they even tried to physically isolate the servers and trick the kernel. Nothing. That biometric signature you hard-coded in, it's a masterpiece. It's not just a lock, it's woven into the core processes. Any attempt to bypass it triggers a cascading data corruption protocol. They can't cut it out without killing the whole game. A spark ignited in the cold emptiness of Kai's chest. A flicker of defiance. A part of him, the most important part, was still in control. "So what's their plan?" he asked. "That's the brilliant part," Anya said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Thorne is a master of turning a screw-up into a feature. They're going to launch without it. They've already got a marketing plan drafted. Nexus Zero, the saga begins, unlock the game's greatest mystery in our first expansion pack coming next year. They're going to sell you back your own ending, Kai. They're not just stealing your work, they're monetizing the theft." The sheer audacity of it left him speechless. It was so perfectly Julian Thorne. "I've been keeping an eye on them," Anya continued, her voice lowering slightly. "Left a little backdoor in their internal network before they walked me out. Call it a severance package for myself. I've got schematics for the Aegis, security rotations, network topology. Everything." Kai's mind began to race, the familiar thrill of a complex problem starting to push aside the despair. The pieces were starting to connect, to form a pattern. "Why are you telling me this, Anya?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, the cynical edge in her voice was gone, replaced by something quieter, something fiercely loyal. "Because I spent 2 years of my life testing that game. I know what it was supposed to be. I watched you pour your soul into it. They're not just erasing you, Kai. They're erasing the truth. And I've always had a problem with faulty logic." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "Launch night is in 6 days," she said, her voice now crisp and professional. "The party will be at the Aegis. All the executives, all the investors, all the press. The whole building will be on celebratory lockdown. Security will be high, but their attention will be focused on the front door." He knew what she was suggesting before she said it. The idea was insane. It was impossible. It was a suicide mission. And it was the only thing he had left. The next 6 days were a blur of encrypted chats and sleepless nights. Kai's apartment transformed from a cave of despair into a mission control center. The whiteboards were wiped clean of old code and filled with ingress routes, patrol timers, and network vulnerabilities. The partnership with Anya was seamless, a fusion of two minds that spoke the same language of systems and logic. She was the strategist, the intelligence officer with eyes inside the enemy camp. He was the tactical expert, the one who had laid the very bricks of the fortress they planned to breach. "The Aegis runs on a proprietary smart building OS," Kai explained during one late-night call, pacing his apartment with his phone pressed to his ear. "I designed the integration with the game servers. The climate control, the lighting, even some of the security doors are networked through the same primary hub that manages the game's data centers. It was for energy efficiency. A single point of failure, Anya said, a hint of admiration in her voice. You magnificent, reckless bastard. It's a vulnerability they won't expect me to use. To them, it's just the HVAC system. To me, it's a side door. They worked relentlessly. Anya fed him a constant stream of data. Updated security codes, maintenance schedules, blueprints so detailed they showed the placement of every wireless access point. Kai, in turn, wrote scripts, built a custom RFID spoofer from a burner phone and a coil of copper wire, and studied the building's layout until he could navigate it in his sleep. He was no longer just a victim. The passivity that had defined him for 6 months had burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. This was a different kind of creation. He wasn't building a world, he was planning to break into one. It felt like designing the ultimate speedrun for a game that could only be played once. On the 5th night, with less than 48 hours to go, Anya went quiet for a moment. The usual rapid-fire exchange of information ceased. Kai, she said, her voice losing its usual clipped efficiency. You need to be sure about this. Once you walk through that door, there's no walking back. They won't just sue you. They'll press charges. This is real-world felony territory. Kai stopped his pacing. He looked around his apartment at the mess, the cold coffee, the single glowing screen that had been his only companion. Then his eyes landed on the photo of David. He thought of his brother's boundless imagination, his fierce belief in stories. He thought of Julian Thorne's smug, dismissive smile. He thought of the legal letter that sought to erase his very existence. What was he going back to? A life of quiet, impotent rage? A future where he was afraid to even mention his greatest achievement? They had already taken everything that mattered. They left me nothing to come back to, he said, his voice steady. He picked up the photo, his thumb gently tracing the outline of his brother's smiling face. This isn't just about the code anymore. It's about the memory. He deserves to have his story told right. Okay, Anya said softly. Okay, Kai, he heard the click of her keyboard. A moment later, a file appeared on his secure drive. It was a forged work order for a food delivery service, scheduled for 8 p.m. on launch night. The delivery address was a service kitchen on the sub-level of the Aegis. Your way in, Anya said. The uniform and insulated bag will be in a locker at the bus station downtown. Code is 1138. After that, you're on your own until I can get you access to their internal comms, the point of no return. It wasn't a dramatic leap, it was a quiet, conscious decision. It was the moment the protagonist accepts the quest. He was no longer reacting. He was acting. He spent the final day not preparing his gear, but in quiet ritual. He cleaned his apartment, throwing away the old takeout containers and empty milk cartons. He backed up his personal files. And then he sat down and opened a blank document. For an hour, he wrote, pouring out the full story of Nexus Zero's creation, of David's ideas, of the promises made. He encrypted the file and mailed it to a handful of independent gaming journalists, with a timer set to release it in 24 hours. Win or lose, the truth would come out. As night fell on launch day, Kai put on a cheap, branded polo shirt over his dark clothes. He looked at his reflection in the dark monitor screen. The tired, haunted man was still there, but his eyes held a new light, not of hope but of purpose. It was the look of a creator who had finally decided to step inside his own game and face the final boss. The city throbbed with the pulse of the launch. On the sides of skyscrapers, holographic ads for Nexus Zero flickered and danced, casting the rain-slicked streets in an ethereal blue glow. The Aegis itself was the epicenter, a shard of obsidian and light stabbing into the bruised purple sky. Beams of light swept the clouds, and a crowd of fans and press huddled behind velvet ropes, their faces upturned and illuminated. Kai, hunched against the wind, looked like just another cog in the city's machinery. The ill-fitting food delivery uniform was a surprisingly effective camouflage. No one looks twice at the person bringing them their dinner. He clutched the insulated delivery bag to his chest, its contents far more valuable than the pad thai it was supposed to contain. Inside was his laptop, the RFID spoofer, and a set of custom-made lockpicks. He approached the service entrance at the rear of the building, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This was the first test. Anya's voice crackled to life in the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece he wore. Okay, Kai. Security kiosk 40 feet ahead. The guard's name is Frank. He's 58, hates his job, and lives for his smoke breaks. Your work order is legit in the system, but don't give him a reason to look too closely. Keep it simple. Kai took a deep breath, the cold, damp air stinging his lungs. He walked up to the reinforced glass window. A portly guard with a bored expression looked up from his tabloid. Delivery, Kai mumbled, sliding the forged work order into the tray. Frank picked it up, his eyes scanning it with lazy disinterest. Kitchen S on B2. You know the way? Yes, Kai lied. The guard grunted, his thumb hovering over the button to release the magnetic lock on the door. He squinted at Kai. You're new. Haven't seen you before. Kai's blood ran cold. He forced a shrug. They move us around. Big night, I guess. Frank held his gaze for a moment too long. It was a test. A flicker of suspicion in the old guard's eyes. Then he sighed, the moment passing. The launch party was a hassle, and he just wanted to get back to his paper. A green light flashed and a loud buzz signaled the lock's release. Don't get lost, Frank said, already turning back to his reading. Kai slipped inside, the heavy steel door closing behind him with a definitive tomb-like thud. He was in. The pristine, public-facing architecture of the Aegis was a lie. Behind the curtain, it was a sterile labyrinth of concrete corridors and exposed ductwork, humming with the building's life support. The air smelled of ozone and industrial cleaner. He followed the signs for sublevel B2, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Nice work, Anya's voice whispered in his ear. And now the real fun begins. There's a ventilation shaft access panel 30 feet down the hall on your left. It's a direct route to the server farm levels, bypassing 2 security checkpoints. The panel is magnetically locked. Kai found the panel, a simple square of metal flush with the wall. He pulled a small, powerful electromagnet from his bag and placed it over the lock. A soft click and the panel swung open. He ducked inside, pulling the heavy bag in after him. The space was tight, a river of cold air flowing through the darkness. He crawled on his hands and knees, the sound of the fans a deafening roar. Okay, coming up on the laser grid, Anya warned. It's tied to the building's primary security sweep. You'll have a 6-second window after each pass. I'll count you down. Move on my mark. Exactly on my mark, Kai peered through a grate. Ahead, a web of brilliant red laser beams crisscrossed the shaft. It was straight out of a video game. His video game, in fact. He'd helped design a similar trap for a level in Nexus Zero. The irony was not lost on him. A sweep in 5. 4, Anya's voice was a steady metronome in the chaos. On 3, 2, 1, go, the lasers vanished. Kai scrambled forward, his bag banging against the metal walls. The 6 seconds felt like an eternity and no time at all. He threw himself past the threshold just as the red web snapped back into existence behind him, so close he could feel the heat on the back of his neck. He lay there panting, his forehead pressed against the cool metal, sweat trickling into his eyes. He had passed the first gatekeeper. The game was on. After what felt like an hour of claustrophobic crawling, Kai emerged from the ventilation system into a deserted office floor. The main launch party was 3 levels up, a distant rumble of bass and celebration filtering through the concrete. Down here, it was a ghost town of empty cubicles and sleeping computer monitors. This had been his floor. He moved through the darkness, a phantom in his former home. He ran a hand along the cool plastic of a cubicle wall, his muscle memory guiding him toward what used to be his desk. It was occupied now, sanitized of any personality save for a corporate-issued mug and a framed stock photo of a smiling, generic family. A wave of melancholy washed over him. Remnants of his life here were everywhere, like faint digital echoes. A whiteboard still bore the faint, ghosted image of a complex algorithm he'd drawn during a marathon coding session. He saw the coffee machine he and Anya had jury-rigged to brew stronger coffee. Each artifact was a small pinprick to the heart. Kai, stay focused, Anya's voice cut through his reverie, her tone sharp but not unkind. You need to get to the main network conduit on the east side of the floor. That's your access point. As he rounded a corner, he froze. A figure stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city. Marcus Cole. Kai ducked behind a large potted plant, his body rigid. Marcus was on his phone, his voice a low, tense murmur. No, the build is stable, Marcus said, rubbing his temples. A few minor glitches, but nothing the players will notice. The core systems are there solid, he paused. Yes, I'm proud of what my team has accomplished. We got it done, my team. The words were a quiet, sharp twist of a knife. Marcus was taking credit for code he barely understood, for a foundation he had tried and failed to replicate. Just then, a door at the far end of the hall hissed open, spilling light and the sound of chatter. A woman slipped out, looking furtively over her shoulder before letting the door close. She had a press pass hanging around her neck. Kai recognized her from a tech blog he used to follow, Elena Petrova, an investigative journalist known for her sharp, incisive takedowns of corporate malpractice. She clearly wasn't supposed to be here. She moved with a quiet purpose, her eyes scanning the empty office, her phone held up as if she were discreetly taking photos. She was hunting. Their paths were about to intersect. As Marcus ended his call and turned, Elena flattened herself into the alcove of a darkened doorway. Marcus walked past, oblivious, heading for the elevators. Elena exhaled, leaning against the wall. She looked up and her eyes met Kai's. For a second, they both stood frozen, two intruders caught in the same searchlight. Her expression was a mixture of alarm and curiosity. She opened her mouth to speak, but Kai put a finger to his lips, his eyes wide with a silent plea. He didn't know if she was a friend or foe, but they shared one thing in that moment. They were both somewhere they shouldn't be. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A silent truce. She was after a story. He was after something more. For now, their goals weren't in conflict. She slipped back the way she came, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived. The encounter left Kai rattled. The building wasn't as empty as he'd thought. He was a ghost here, yes, but he wasn't the only. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside, and continued toward the east conduit, the meeting with the journalist a new, unpredictable variable in an already impossible equation. The server room was the heart of the Aegis. It was a cathedral of data, kept at a constant, chilly temperature, the only sound the synchronized hum of thousands of cooling fans, a digital choir singing the song of information. Rows upon rows of black server racks stood like monoliths, their blinking green and blue lights reflecting endlessly in the polished anti-static floor. Okay, you're here, Anya's voice was tight with tension. A security camera feed is looping for the next 60 seconds. After that, you're exposed. Find the console. Kai slipped through the door she had remotely unlocked. The air was cold and clean, a stark contrast to the stuffy crawl spaces he'd been. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning for the primary access terminal. According to the original blueprints, it should be in the center of the room. A standalone console, the only one with a biometric scanner, the physical key to the digital lock of David's archive. He reached the center of the room. His stomach plummeted. The space where the console should have been was empty. A simple hollow terminal stand stood in its place, cables unplugged and dangling like severed nerves. It was gone. Anya, it's not here, Kai whispered into his comm, his voice frantic. The console is gone, what? That's impossible. Check again, I'm looking right at it, there's nothing here. He could hear the furious clicking of her keyboard through his earpiece. Wait. I'm seeing something. A priority work order logged less than 3 hours ago. Highest level clearance signed by Thorne himself. Her voice was laced with disbelief. He moved it. He moved the goddamn console. Moved it where? Kai demanded, his one perfect plan disintegrating into dust around him. To his penthouse office, Anya said, her voice grim. Top floor. The most secure location in the entire building, the midpoint. Oh, the twist. This was the moment in every game where the player realizes the princess is in another castle. His meticulously planned infiltration, his speedrun, had just hit a brick wall. The penthouse wasn't just another level. It was the final fortress, protected by private security details, state-of-the-art surveillance, and Julian Thorne himself. It was a place the original blueprints didn't cover in detail because access was granted to only a handful of people on the planet. Kai's confidence, so carefully constructed over the past week, shattered. He had been so focused on getting into the building that he never considered the enemy might change the map on him. It was a brilliant, paranoid move by Thorne. He hadn't been able to break the lock, so he'd done the next best thing, moved it into a vault. It's over, Kai breathed, leaning against a cold server rack. The hum of the machines suddenly felt mocking. He had failed. He had gotten this far only to be outmaneuvered by a man who didn't play by the rules, a man who simply rewrote them to his advantage. Kai, get out of there, Anya urged, her voice tight with alarm. The camera loop is about to expire. Abort the mission. Get out now, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the sudden, crushing weight of his failure. He had gambled everything on this, and the house had won. The ghost was trapped. The 60-second loop expired. A tiny red light on a camera in the corner of the ceiling blinked once, switching from standby to active. He was exposed. Before Kai could force his leaden feet to move, the door to the server room hissed open. And it wasn't security. It was Marcus Cole. Marcus stopped short, his face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. He was holding a tablet, probably checking on the server status before the launch went live. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the humming, blinking expanse of the server farm. The ghost and his replacement. Kai, Marcus whispered as if he were seeing an apparition. What in God's name are you doing here? You know what I'm doing here, Marcus, Kai said, his voice flat. Marcus's shock quickly hardened into something defensive, almost angry. You need to leave. Right now. Before you do something incredibly stupid. It's a little late for that, don't you think? I can still help you, Marcus said, taking a step forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. Thorne, he knows you might try something. He told me to offer you a deal if you showed up. A severance package. A generous one. You sign a new NDA, you disappear, and you're set for life. The offer was so insulting, so utterly misjudged that Kai could only laugh, a short, bitter bark of a sound. A deal? You're offering me hush money to let you sell my brother's memory. The accusation hit its mark. A flicker of shame crossed Marcus's face before it was replaced by resentment. I saved this project, Kai. You and your artistic purity were going to get it canceled. You were going to let it die on a server because you weren't willing to compromise. I made the hard choices. I got it over the finish line. You didn't finish it, Kai shot back, his voice rising. You chopped it up and sold it for parts. You took his story and you put a price tag on it. Did you even know why I built the archives? Marcus looked away. We have a roadmap for future content. Stop, Kai said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Just stop talking. The confrontation hung in the air, thick and toxic. Marcus saw the resolve in Kai's eyes, the utter rejection of his offer. He saw his own comfortable new position, his promotion, his future, all threatened by the ghost he had helped to create. And he made his choice. He subtly tapped the side of his tablet. A silent alarm. Anya's voice screamed in Kai's ear. He tripped an alert. Security is on the way. They're locking down the floor. Get out, Kai Gio. Red lights began to flash on the ceiling, bathing the server room in a hellish, pulsing glow. The low hum of the servers was joined by the rising shriek of an alarm. This was it. The lowest point. Trapped, betrayed by his oldest friend, with the enemy closing in. He was out of time, out of options, out of hope. He looked at Marcus, at his pale, determined face, and saw the finality of his betrayal. Then his gaze fell upon a small maintenance terminal at the end of the server rack. It was a direct command line interface to the game's kernel. A backdoor he had built for himself for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. With security guards pounding on the door, Kai made a split-second decision. Anya was yelling at him to run, to find an escape route. But he wasn't thinking about escape. In that moment, he was thinking about the promise he had made. If he couldn't reclaim his creation, he could still protect its soul from desecration. He lunged for the terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a single command line he knew by heart. Initiate protocol. Ouroboros, it was a failsafe, a digital self-destruct sequence he had designed in case of a hostile corporate takeover. He didn't activate the final wipe command. He just initiated the pre-sequence. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A wave of digital chaos erupted from the servers. Every network system in the Aegis tied to the game's data hub convulsed. The lights flickered and died, plunging the server room into strobing emergency red. The alarm stuttered and changed pitch. On the monitors, code cascaded in waterfalls of nonsensical data. He hadn't destroyed Nexus Zero. He had turned it into a poltergeist. He had unleashed his own ghost into the machine. Chaos was a ladder. As alarms blared and security teams scrambled to contain a system-wide meltdown they couldn't comprehend, Kai saw his only path. It wasn't out. It was up. Kai, what did you do? Anya's voice was a frantic buzz in his ear, laced with both terror and awe. Half the building's systems are offline or rebooting in a loop. I created a diversion, Kai said, his voice calm for the first time all night. The desperation had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unshakable purpose. I'm not aborting Anya. I'm going for the penthouse. He slipped out of the server room amidst the confusion, leaving a stunned Marcus Cole to deal with the security team that finally burst through the door. The building was in pandemonium. The Ouroboros protocol was a work of malicious genius, a cascading glitch that turned the pristine, orderly Aegis into a funhouse of malfunctions. Elevators were trapped between floors, electronic doors unlocked and locked at random, and the soothing corporate ambience had been replaced by a symphony of conflicting alarms. Security was diverted, their attention focused on the digital heart of the building, not on the lone figure moving swiftly through the chaos. Kai took the stairs, his body fueled by a surge of adrenaline. He was halfway up a stairwell when a door opened and someone stumbled out. It was Alina Petrova, the journalist. Her press pass was gone and she looked flushed and angry. They tried to kick me out, she said, recognizing him immediately. The whole press pool. As soon as the system went crazy, they declared a security threat and started herding everyone out. I slipped away, she held up her phone. My editor thinks it's a server crash. I know it's more than that. I got an encrypted file this morning. About a fired developer's stolen code, a secret final level about you. She had gotten his message. In that moment, their goals fully aligned. She needed the proof. He needed a witness. They moved the console, Kai said, not breaking his stride as he continued up the stairs. It's in Thorne's office. The top floor, Alina's eyes widened. You're the ghost, she breathed, a sudden understanding dawning on her face. You're the ghost in the machine, and I'm about to make a very loud noise, Kai replied. Can you get the story out? I mean right now, live. A determined glint appeared in her eyes. Let me get a signal. She followed him up the stairs, no longer just a reporter chasing a lead, but a co-conspirator in the heist. He had the key. She had the microphone. Together, they could bring the whole house of cards down. The ascent was a blur of flashing emergency lights and echoing alarms. He used the chaos as cover, bypassing disabled security cameras and slipping past distracted guards. With every floor he climbed, he felt less like an intruder and more like a rightful heir coming to claim his throne. He was no longer a ghost haunting the code. He was the code made manifest, come to reclaim its home. The penthouse floor was an oasis of calm in the chaos. The alarms were muted here, the lights steady. Private security, loyal only to Thorne, stood guard, men in sharp suits with earpieces, their faces grim and alert. They were expecting trouble, but they were looking for it on the elevator, not out of the fire escape door. Kai burst through the door, Alina a step behind him, her phone already recording. He was just in time. Julian Thorne stood before a massive, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the glittering city, a small group of investors and executives flanking him. He was addressing a camera, broadcasting his triumphant launch speech to the world. A massive screen behind him showed the Nexus Zero logo, waiting for the moment he would ceremonially press the button on the sleek, silver console that sat on his marble desk. The console. And so, we present to you not just a game, but a new world, a testament to the vision and dedication of the Aethelred family, Thorne was saying, his voice as smooth as ever. Kai's entrance was an impossible, jarring record scratch. Heads turned. The investors gasped. Thorne's private security moved instantly, converging on Kai. But Julian Thorne was a performer above all else. He didn't panic. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile, and incorporated the interruption into his narrative. And speaking of dedication, he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he turned to face Kai, it seems one of our former and more passionate employees has decided to join us. Kalen Vance, everyone. A brilliant but unstable mind who sadly couldn't keep up with the collaborative pace of modern game design. The guards grabbed Kai's arms, their grips like iron. This was the final battle, and it wasn't a firefight, but a battle of will, of narrative, of proximity to a thumbprint scanner. Thorne, it's over, Kai grunted, struggling against the guards. Tell them the truth, Thorne laughed, a rich theatrical sound. The truth is that you're a thief who tried to sabotage this company, and you've come here tonight in a final, pathetic plea for the attention you feel you're owed. It's a sad story, really. He was dismantling Kai psychologically, painting him as the villain in his own story, just as he had done for the past 6 months. But something was different this time. Alina was there. Julian Thorne, she said, her voice clear and steady as she stepped forward, her phone held high. Alina Petrova with the Digital Sentinel. Is it true that you're launching the game without its final level, a level that is biometrically locked to the man you just called a thief? Her feed was live, piggybacking on the global launch broadcast. Her question and Kai's ragged appearance was being beamed to millions. The official narrative was being challenged in real time. Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The investors murmured nervously. That was the only opening Kai needed. He wasn't the frightened, passive coder from 6 months ago. He had fought his way to the top of this tower. He had faced down his own ghosts. Thorne's words, the words that used to cripple him with self-doubt, were now just noise. With a desperate surge of strength, he wrenched one arm free. He wasn't aiming for Thorne. He was aiming for the desk. He lunged a single, final, desperate push. A guard tackled him around the waist and they crashed to the floor, but Kai's momentum carried him forward. His hand stretched out, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the console. He slammed his thumb down onto the biometric scanner. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then on the massive screen behind Thorne, the gleaming Nexus Zero logo glitched, dissolving into a stream of pixels. It was replaced by a new loading screen, one no one but Kai had ever seen. The text was simple, elegant, and world-changing. David's archive unlocked. The screen came to life, not with explosions or monsters, but with a quiet, poignant beauty. It was a digital museum, a walkthrough of the game's own creation. Early concept art, much of it drawn in a familiar, youthful hand, faded in and out. Voice memos from Kai played softly, his voice filled with passion as he worked through a complex piece of code. The centerpiece of the level was a perfect, interactive recreation of his and David's childhood bedroom. It was a testament to memory, a quiet digital space where nothing was ever truly lost. Then the final screen appeared. It was an unerasable, hard-coded credit slate. At the top, in large, clear letters, it read, Creator, Kaylin Vance, and underneath, a single heartfelt line, in loving memory of David Vance, the first architect of worlds. The truth in a billion pixels was undeniable. Julian Thorne's face, broadcast live to the world, was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The investors backed away from him as if he were radioactive. On a smaller news feed visible in the corner of the room, the Aethelred Studios stock ticker ATHR was nosediving, a plummeting red line of failure. Alina's stream was now the primary global feed, her calm, professional voice narrating the corporate implosion as it happened. Thorne's private security, confused and unsure of who the enemy was anymore, still held Kai. But their grip had loosened. The real authorities, the city police, arrived moments later, drawn by the escalating security alerts. They listened to Alina's report, saw the evidence on the screen, and their attention shifted immediately from the disheveled man on the floor to the immaculate CEO whose empire was crumbling around him. As they escorted a sputtering, furious Thorne from the room, Kai saw Marcus being led away by a different set of guards in the hallway. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no anger in Kai's gaze, only a profound sense of pity. Marcus, the man who had compromised everything to get to the top, had reached his destination only to find it was a cliff. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The ghost had not just rattled its chains, it had brought the whole haunted house down. 3 months later, the sun streamed through the large window of a small, bright office in a converted warehouse district. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. On the wall, a whiteboard was covered in a sprawling mind map of ideas for a new game. This was the headquarters of Archive Games, the independent studio Kai had founded with Anya. The spectacular implosion of Aethelred Studios had been swift. The ensuing legal battle, fueled by Alina's exposé and a flood of corroborating testimony from other former employees, had ended in a landmark settlement. The Nexus Zero IP rights had reverted to their original creator. Kai stood at the whiteboard, a pen in his hand, a thoughtful smile on his face. He was still lanky, still preferred hoodies, but the hunted look in his eyes was gone. In its place was a quiet confidence, the look of a leader. The door opened and Alina walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her story, The Ghost in the Machine, had won her a prestigious journalism award and had become the definitive account of the Aethelred scandal. Thinking of new worlds to build, she asked, handing him a mug. Their relationship, forged in the chaos of that launch night, had become the steady, quiet center of his new life. Always, he said, his smile widening. He leaned in and kissed her, a simple, easy gesture of belonging. He glanced over at his new desk. It was clean, organized. His monitors showed the promising beginnings of a new project. And next to them, propped up in its familiar frame, was the photo of him and David. Kai picked it up, looking at his brother's bright, imaginative face. He had done it. He had fought for the story, for the memory. He had learned that creation wasn't just about the act of building, it was also about the courage to defend what you have built. He was no longer a ghost, no longer a victim. He was a creator, a founder, a storyteller who had finally found his own voice. He set the photo down, took a sip of coffee, and turned back to the whiteboard, ready to build the next world. The inner journey was complete.